Hello, I'm Jyotika. Welcome to this lesson in which we are going to learn how to write a contrast ERQ. Most requests I get are for year 2 syllabus. Students tell me that for year 2, that is for specializations like abnormal or health, relationships, development, they do not get enough resources, and since only ERQs have to be written on paper 2, they find it difficult. So I am not only taking a contrast question in this video, it's also going to be from year 2 syllabus. This question I believe has come either in May or November 2023. I think November 23, I'll just check again. And here they've asked us to contrast the biological approach and sociocultural approach to understanding the etiology of abnormal psychology. Etiology is by far the most popular topic in abnormal psychology. So I think this lesson should be relevant to the most of you who are studying in IBPsychology. Now in this video, one thing is I am going to go through the answer, pointing out to you how this answer will score on different criteria for ERQ. So I'll keep on pointing out what this is an exemplar answer. This is a high scoring answer. So what all is making it a high scoring answer, I will keep discussing with you. I want to tell you at the beginning only about 2-3 things. One, the answer is longer than expected. The word count for ERQs is a maximum of 1200. This answer is way beyond that, because in this answer, for the sake of contrasting, I have taken many different arguments, 3 different arguments. In the paper you can go for 2. So where you can reduce the length of the answer, I will point out to you. Why I have taken it as such, like why have I taken 3 arguments instead of 2? Just to show you different possibilities of contrasting. Because my aim is not to give you a ready-made answer. My aim is to explain to you how the answer should be written. So as many examples as I could include, I have included in the answer. That's one. Second, please watch this video after you've done your study for etiology. So after you're clear on the concepts and you know what the biological approach and sociocultural approach is, that is when you'll be able to understand best. If you haven't learned the topics and directly you're watching this video, it's going to be difficult for you to follow what I'm going to explain. Thirdly, I will post this answer on my website and I'll link it below in the description box and in the pinned comment, from where you can download it for free. Do keep it alongside you as you're watching this video, I would suggest, because you might find that in between, as I'm explaining, you need to pause the video, read the answer a little and then watch the video again. Because I'm not going to be teaching the biological and sociocultural etiology as such in my video. I'm just going to be showing to you how the answer should be written. So sometimes you will feel the need to read the answer to find what I'm saying relevant. Okay, so make sure you have the answer also in front of you. You can just pause the video and read on the screen from time to time. So keeping all that in mind, let us see what is the structure of this answer and how it scores on different criteria. That's my main agenda. Firstly, when they ask us for a contrast ERQ, be it for paper 1 or paper 2, we have to make sure that we contrast throughout. That is the major requirement for this answer. We cannot contrast whatever 2 approaches are given only in the introduction or only in the conclusion, in the sense that we cannot structure the answer such that, say, the first half of the answer is entirely about biological approach and the second is entirely about socio-cultural approach. That is not the way in which we write the answer. The answer has to be written in a way that every point that we are making is being contrasted between the 2 approaches. So make sure throughout the answer is totally focused on the command term. Second is you are not to draw similarities between the 2 approaches. Many students interpret the contrast command term as a compare command term. In compare type of questions, which is not there in the IB syllabus, but what we do is we give similarities and differences between whatever has been asked for. Contrast is clearly about giving differences. You have to show how these two approaches are different from each other, not what is common between them or what is similar between them. If those are the points you give, those will not be credited because that is not what the command term is asking you for. So keeping these overarching rules in mind, now let us go through the answer step by step. I will not read out the entire answer. At the correct junctions in the answer, I will just keep on pointing out how it is meeting the requirement for the given ERQ. In the introduction, you can see there is a very brief discussion on the definition or in general what the two etiologies are, but again in a way that they are contrasted from each other. So in this answer, first the biological approach is explained. In that it is mentioned what it stands for. So the biological approach stands for highlighting genetic, neurological and physiological factors in the development of mental disorders. Now we also need to define the sociocultural approach because even that has been asked for. So what is done in the answer is, instead of keeping these two definitions separate, the definitions are also contrasted against each other. So you can see how that rule of contrasting throughout is being followed. Right from the introduction, even the definitions are being contrasted against each other. So on the one hand, while the biological approach brings about physiological factors, the sociocultural approach is the one which brings about social, environmental and cultural influences. A lot of linking words and linking openings of sentences can be very helpful for a contrast command term. I know it sounds trivial, but it can be very helpful in writing an effective answer. Small things like these can matter a lot. So using terms like or sentence beginnings like on the other hand, in contrast, on the flip side, as opposed to this, and so forth. So if you use phrases like this to begin your sentences in the contrast command term, it can be very useful to you, not only because it helps the examiner to see, like it really makes it explicit where you are showing the differences between the two approaches. For you also, when you're writing, if you aim to write with such beginning phrases, it really keeps you on track. Like you don't deviate or you don't go away from contrasting the approaches, because when you begin a sentence like this, you know you must follow with something that differentiates this approach from the other. So for your good writing also, using these phrases can help you, and it can make your answer easier to read for the examiner as well. So firstly, what is done in this essay, the very basic definition of the two approaches are contrasted against each other. After that, as we always do for all command terms, what is to follow in the present essay has been outlined. So this essay for the biological approach, it is going to take the support of Kendler et al. Study, Genetic Explanation of Depression, and at the same time it is going to take socio-cultural approach, Brown and Harris study, to show the relative importance of that approach. Okay, so now in terms of criteria being met, you can see in the first paragraph, Criterion A, which is about explaining the problem in the question, that has been met. If the candidate would have just restated what is then the question. Unfortunately, this advice is going around a lot in IB psychology. Just restate what is then the question in the introduction. So in the 2 mark band which is there for criterion A, you would just score a 1 for restating, because it counts as description of the problem. You need to explain the problem. Explanation is evident in this answer, because you can see not only are the approaches defined, but then it is also been highlighted that these approaches, they can help to understand the causes of psychological disorders. Contrasting them will help to understand better how each of these show the causes of psychological disorders. So what is the purpose behind contrasting? That has been explained over here. So we've gone a little deeper into the problem. Instead of just saying this is what the biological approach is, that is what the socio-cultural approach is, why we need to consider these approaches and why we need to differentiate between them, that has been explained in the very first sentence. So that accounts for explaining the problem. Not only that, when the essay is outlined, that outline has also been used to explain the problem. So in this essay, how we are going to explain the problem is by taking the biological approach, seeing a supporting study, and seeing how that study illustrates what type of factors come within biological. And the same thing is going to be repeated for the Brown and Harris sociocultural approach. So throughout in the introduction, you can see there's an explanation of the problem which is given in the question. That helps it to score higher. In the next paragraph, the argument which is going to be made is addressed. I know many students feel for discuss questions you need to have arguments only, not for other command terms. It is right to an extent, but if you go to see in essence, what is an argument? It is a point being made in the essay. It's a theme of the essay, or it is what you are trying to bring about in your essay. You're just highlighting it to the reader. So you can have an argument, of course, in every command term which is there. Even if you don't want to think of it as an argument, because that is something you like to reserve for discuss command term, you can think of it in terms of on what point or on what basis am I contrasting the two approaches right now. I need to make it clear to the examiner. So this is a way of saying that firstly we are going to contrast the two approaches on reductionism versus holism. Okay, so when we say like contrast biological and sociocultural approaches, there is so much to differentiate between them, right from the methodologies they adopt to their practical usefulness, to how much they have been supported by research, to what side of issues and debates they take. There is so much to discuss and contrast between them. So we need to make it clear to the examiner which point are we taking for contrast. So that is what we are mentioning right at the beginning. So once the introduction is complete, we just make it clear, okay, now we are going to contrast these two with respect to the debate of reductionism versus holism. I would strongly recommend you definitely make it explicit which argument or which point you are taking at the beginning, rather than just delving into the contrast. So just beginning with the biological approach is reductionist, the sociocultural approach is not reductionist. It just makes for more effective writing if you just point out right away what your topic is going to be for discussion further. Again, I would like to remind you, if you're feeling a little lost or you're finding it a little difficult to follow what I'm saying, just make sure to pause the video, read the answer. It'll make it easier for you to follow, because I'm talking about strategies and the content of the answer is something you might need to understand the strategy. So you can just pause and read through it. Now here in this essay, once the reductionism holism debate is outlined, of course the following paragraphs are going to be totally focused on this point or this argument. So first, the biological approach is said to be reductionist, and then it's explained why we would consider that it is reductionist. As with all ERQs, and I have mentioned this in previous videos as well, first you must always explain the point or argument you are making without reference to the study, and then just use the study as an illustration or a support for that point. Don't make the habit of explaining your point totally with the help of the study, such that if we remove the study from your answer, there is no explanation of the argument left. Studies, if you see the criteria for scoring also, you will realize that they are meant to support the arguments being made. They are not meant as explanations of the arguments by themselves. So basically what you need to do, first explain the argument, explain why biological approach is reductionist, then include a study which will go to serve as an example for your argument. Don't directly jump into the study, which is what a lot of students do, and that's why they score poorly on Criterion B, because they do not show their knowledge and understanding of the topic. They just start showing research support, which is Criterion C directly. So that could be one reason why you are losing marks on your essays. Okay, so now you can see the rest of the paragraph. Like I said, I will not be reading it out, but it keeps on explaining why the biological approach is reductionist, exactly which elements which it considers in isolation makes it reductionist. Then the paragraph, because it's contrast and we have to contrast throughout, it moves towards the socio-cultural approach, points out that it is relatively more holistic, and then explains why we would consider socio-cultural to be more holistic than the reductionist biological approach. So again, I know it is repetitive, but it is very important for you to realize that in every paragraph, with respect to every argument, both approaches are being contrasted. We are not structuring the answer that, okay, first half of the answer we'll explain biological approach is reductionist, and next half of the answer we will explain that socio-cultural approach is holistic. At the same time, the moment we have picked up an argument, we have contrasted the two approaches against each other. That is how a contrast answer needs to be structured. So I've taken the argument reductionism versus holism. Immediately I've pointed out how the biological approach is reductionist, and as against this, how the sociocultural approach is more holistic. That is how we draw a contrast. Now coming to how research studies should be used for support when it comes to the contrast command term. When it comes to the contrast command term, the research studies also need to be contrasted against each other. So of course, first we'll describe the research study because we need to score on Criterion C. And Criterion C involves giving an effective summary of the study such that it can be fully understood by someone who's not familiar with the study. So first we have explained the Kendler study in the standard format: aim, procedure, results, and conclusion. You can pause the video, see how it has been summarized in this format. We don't have to explicitly, state this is the aim of the study, this is the procedure. But if you read through the paragraph, you'll realize that it has been structured as such. While concluding the study, we have made sure to link back the study to the reductionist argument being made. As such, there is so much to take away from the Kendler study. So there is so much to take away from the Kendler study, but right now what are we interested in? What is the matter of focus right now? It is the reductionism approach of the biological approach. So we are concluding the study in a way that it shows that, see, even this study, it is just on twins. It just brings about heritability rates. It just shows genetic inheritance of depression. It does not account for socio-cultural factors or personal factors, and that is why it shows further, or it illustrates how the biological approach is reductionist. So undoubtedly we describe the study, but not in isolation, in view of the argument which we have made. So of course we have to give the aim, procedure, results as we always do, but in the end, while finishing off or concluding the study, we should link it back to the point being made earlier, so that we can reinforce that the study is serving to show that that argument is correct. Same way we have to summarize the Brown and Harris study. So in this paragraph, again you can pause the video and see, you will find that aim, procedure, results of the Brown and Harris study have been given. Very importantly, in the conclusion, not only has the study been linked back to how socio-cultural approach is more holistic, also it has been contrasted with the Kendler study. Like I said, even the research support that we give should be contrasted against each other. So we take the opportunity to explain this in the conclusion, that just as the Kendler study is reductionist, this one in contrast is comprehensive. It integrates more elements, whereas Kendler isolates the element of genetic explanation in depression. So we have again maintained the tone of contrasting throughout the answer, even while meeting Criterion C. Okay, also I forgot in the previous paragraph to point out that that paragraph helps to meet Criterion B, knowledge and understanding. A good practice which I have learned from Popov sir is that when we write an ERQ, we should just initially, when we are practicing fresh how to write ERQs, we should just see if we strip away all the research support and research evaluation in the essay. Is there anything left in the essay? Then we can meet Criterion B. Then we have met it. If the only thing our essay has is a list of one study after another, an evaluation of one study after another, with nothing else to show, like there's just no general explanation that we have given, there's nothing we have said without reference to the studies, that means we have not shown knowledge and understanding. We have just shown that we know about the research studies which are there, and we know how to critically think about the research studies, not about the general topic which has been asked. So in that case, we're definitely losing marks on Criterion B, and of course on some other criteria as well. For example, if we take critical thinking, our critical thinking will be limited only to the studies. It will not link back to the general topic which is there. So definitely we will lose some marks on Criterion D as well, but majorly we will lose marks on Criterion B if that is the approach we take. So make sure you have paragraphs for Criterion B which show your knowledge and understanding of the topic in general without reference to the studies. I know some points which I make are a little repetitive, but I really want to reinstate those points in your mind. Though that is from experience, we know where students keep on losing marks. So we don't want you to repeat those mistakes. Now, of course, we have to meet Criterion D, which is on critical thinking. It's not difficult to critically evaluate studies. In fact, on websites like In Thinking, that's Think IB, and some of others of them, you will find strengths and weaknesses given for every study. And once you learn the Peel format of elaboration, you know how to present those strengths and weaknesses in a contextualized way. So it's not difficult to score. Still, why students lose marks on Criterion D? Because they tend to evaluate the studies in isolation. Unless the question itself is that, okay, evaluate the research or evaluate the studies, for example, in abnormal etiology. There it's okay if you just evaluate the studies in isolation, though I would not recommend that. But when it comes to you are contrasting the larger perspectives, biological and sociocultural approaches, in that case, if you're just evaluating studies in isolation and you're not linking back how that evaluation shows any critical thinking towards the larger approaches, you are going to lose marks on Criterion D. So basically saying Criterion D is about critical thinking, not towards the studies which are there, but towards the larger topic at hand. So undoubtedly you have to again use the studies only as an example to show the strengths and weaknesses of the topic, but making sure that you're linking back to the topic and not just leaving it at the evaluation of the studies. As one example, you can see Kendler et al. Study is very meritorious because it has a large sample and it has been done very realistically by obtaining actual concordance rates of the twins. But what does this evaluation or what does this strength of the Kendler study serve to show about the larger argument that the biological approach is reductionist? It serves to show that the credibility of that approach is likely to be high. Particularly the credibility of the point that it is reductionist is likely to be high because the study has been done on such a large scale that it goes to show that yes, the biological approach does contribute to depression, and yes, it is no matter how reductionist it is, it does hold value. The genetic explanation does account for the development of depression. So the credibility of the study gives credibility to the larger argument at hand. That is what we need to point out. But then again, to be balanced, critical thinking is always about being balanced between strengths and weaknesses. It cannot be tilted at one direction. So definitely there are weaknesses of the study also, that it's only correlational. It's not able to establish that genes are the cause of depression because the researchers haven't really manipulated the genes inherited by the participants. That goes to show further, or it gives further proof that indeed the explanation, the biological approach explanation might be reductionist, because in the study there is no attempt to bring about what environmental or social factors might be contributing to depression. And that is why even in the larger picture, like just taking the biological approach as a whole, studies like these which are done in this approach go to show that the approach does not take an interest in other factors. So it further goes to show that the criticism of the approach that it is reductionist is likely to be true, because even the studies which are there are correlational, which is not a very effective methodology to isolate other factors and say, okay, only biology is playing a role in depression. So that whole reductionist approach might be unwarranted. That is what we are trying to point out. And you can see there's a similar evaluation in the same paragraph for the Brown and Harris study. A strength of the study is taken as its ecological validity, and again it's linked back showing that the larger argument of the social cultural approach, that it is holistic, is an ecologically valid argument. It is realistic. It is what we get to see in real life. In this study, when we see that the women are facing problems, really they are having problems, like these are not stimulated in the laboratory, they're actually happening. So it goes to show socio-cultural approach really contributes to women's depression. But of course, even this study has its limitation. The limitation is that it is also relatively reductionist. It is holistic in comparison to the biological approach, but not completely, because we can argue that even this study does not account for biological factors. So why is it ignoring those? So then we can say the study goes to establish the holism in the socio-cultural approach to an extent, but not fully. That's a limitation. So this paragraph helps to score on Criterion D, more so because it evaluates the studies in context of the point being raised in the essay, and that shows for good critical thinking skills. Also, it's a balanced view. It includes both strengths and weaknesses, which shows fine critical thinking in the sense that the person knows both sides of each of the approaches. So the person knows what is good about them as well as bad about them. Now, when it comes to contrast, this is one point against which we have contrasted the approaches, reductionism versus holism. The next one is about methodological and ethical considerations. In the beginning, I had told you the word count is long for this answer compared to what is required. This is where you can cut down. For teaching purposes, I have included both methodological and ethical considerations. When you are writing the answer, you can just delete either the methodological or ethical consideration, either one which follows, so that you can bring down your answer to the word count requirement. Here I don't have much to explain in the rest of the answer because it's following the same format which I have explained in the previous half of the answer. So you can see, I'll just quickly go through it. The methodological consideration, which is then biological approach, that has been picked up. Again, there are too many considerations within any given approach. So the one which has been picked up here is investigation of twin studies. The use of twin studies, how it serves to be a methodological issue in the biological approach, is what has been highlighted. Again, first without reference to the Kendler study, and then later with reference to the Kendler study, because like I said, for Criterion B, you need to show knowledge and understanding which is independent of the studies which is there. So first, what is the problem of using twin studies in biological approach in general has been explained. And also an ethical consideration has been taken up, which is how stigmatization and labeling of certain groups in society can result if we say that these are the groups which are more likely to develop a disorder because of their inheritance of genes. So that ethical consideration, like I said, if you want to bring down the word count, just skip wherever the ethical consideration is being referred to, or where the methodological, the previous part of the paragraph, you can skip. Okay, now this has been brought about. We know, of course, what's the next thing we are going to do. We are going to follow the same structure we've been following throughout. So now we'll give a socio-cultural approach methodological issue. Here we have taken up the use of self-report is a big issue when it comes to socio-cultural approach, and then of course contrasted it with the biological approach. So if we consider in biological, the issue is of using twin studies, those are objective. So as compared to that, self-report is subjective. That has been highlighted. So it's like whenever I give something about the biological approach, like I'm saying this is the methodological issue. Of course, I know I will have to give for socio-cultural also, because I have to give equal weightage to both. But the way in which I have to give it for the socio-cultural approach is to contrast with what I've already written about the biological approach, not in isolation. That is why I have said that, okay, biological is objective, makes use of twin studies, but then it loses out on when we take a self-report and we come to know from people's perspective what they are undergoing. That is something we cannot bring about using a biological approach to research. So that is very important, but we have shown the weakness also, that because biological is objective, there won't be any bias in interpretation, whereas in sociocultural, because it is using self-report, which is subjective, there can be issues of validity in terms of under-reporting and over-reporting of symptoms or causes of the disorder. So again, contrasting with the biological approach, how the methodology in sociocultural is better as well as how it is worse, both have been pointed out in the essay. In the biological approach, we saw the ethical issue is stigmatization. As opposed to that, in the sociocultural approach, stigmatization is not as big a concern as causing emotional distress to participants is. That is what we have explained next. And just to reiterate the point, if you want to cut down on the word count, just skip out the ethical consideration which is given in this essay. I do not recommend memorizing this ready-made essay and going to the paper. I'm just trying to show you why the word length is excessive. I'm not trying to encourage memorization of this answer. So this paragraph, of course, and the previous one score on Criterion B. They show knowledge and understanding of methodological issues in the form of self-report in twin studies, and ethical issues in the form of stigmatization and emotional distress independently of studies. So they'll score on Criterion B. Then you can see this is followed by the studies to illustrate the points. One thing is, I could have introduced some new studies here because there are so many twin studies that could be used to illustrate the issues which have been brought up. In the same way, there are so many self-report studies in the socio-cultural approach to illustrate that point. But I do not have that much scope in my essay to introduce new studies, and then I've already introduced two, Kendler et al. And Brown and Harris, and they're serving the same purpose. Like even they can demonstrate the ethical and methodological issues. There's no need for me to introduce new studies. One thing which I have pointed out in the previous essay discussion videos is, do not use redundant studies. Right? Don't use studies which go on serving to illustrate the same argument. Of course, here you could say, but I've taken a different argument in the essay, so then I can take some different studies. But what I feel is, why to unnecessarily add to the weight of criterion C and D? Again, kind of tilting the answer towards C and D by covering it too much, as against scoring on criterion B and showing knowledge and understanding. C and D criteria you can meet anyways by including only two studies in the answer. There's no need for more. So I feel you should not push further on those criteria when you already have studies in the essay which can serve all arguments. Why not use them repeatedly? The benefit to you is you can keep up your word count. You won't exceed it because you won't have to describe the studies again and again. So you can use that approach. Also, I feel somewhere using the same studies for different arguments becomes effective in the sense you're able to show your ability to find the same issues, to find different issues in the same studies. So it really shows you know to interpret the studies very well in context of the approaches, the various issues surrounding the approaches. Also that your critical ability is so refined that you could use the same studies to show so many different criticisms and strengths of the same approach arguments. So that really shows your ability that you have gone beyond the just memorizing the studies or just knowing about them to actually understanding them and further extending them to understanding the approach better. So definitely don't use redundant studies and don't use redundant arguments also. So here whatever points we have made, like for methodological, just now we saw biological uses twin studies, and that is what Kendler is. So how the Kendler study is objective, how it is bias free, but at the same time how it creates a problem in the sense that it is limited in scope. It does not consider other factors which could be contributing to depression. All of that is explained in this paragraph. So you can pause, go through it and see how the study has been used to illustrate the points made in the previous paragraph. Same way Brown and Harris study has been used to show how self-report is very helpful because asking women directly was very effective in knowing phenomenologically what they are going through. But at the same time there is a risk that they might have over-reported their symptoms or they might have under-reported them. So again, the same points which we've already explained in terms of Criterion B, we're just pointing them out where we are finding them in the studies. So this again goes to serve Criterion C scores. I'm sorry, it goes to serve Criterion C because it again effectively uses research studies to support the arguments which have been made. The same studies but different descriptions according to the arguments made right now. So that shows the use of studies effectively or relevantly. Also you can see it meets Criterion D because in the process of identifying ethical issues in the study like Kendler, or ethical issues in Brown and Harris, and of course the methodological issues which I just pointed out, we are evaluating the studies also. So again we are saying, okay, in these studies also these strengths and flaws are there. So we are meeting Criterion D as well. So throughout the answer, you must have noticed there is a contrast between approaches. Never does the answer become totally focused on only biological or only socio-cultural approach. Never does it isolate the two. It keeps on discussing the two in parallel throughout. That is very important. And you can see repeatedly all criteria for scoring have been met. So when the answer is written, keeping in view that criteria A, B, C, D need to be met, it has been written. And of course Criterion E is inherently being met throughout the answer. The answer is well organized. It is clear. As you've gone through the answer yourself, you must have realized that because of those points which I have explained throughout the discussion, that how studies need to be used only as examples and the argument itself should be explained. It's very clear to understand. There's clarity. The examiner does not have to read through the study and estimate what point the student is trying to make. It's directly explained to the examiner. So there's clarity, and of course organization is there because throughout the answer is structured. Every paragraph is going on contrasting between the two approaches. So that's the best organization we can give to such an answer. Definitely it will score full 2 on Criterion E. And further to strengthen Criterion E, there's a conclusion. ERQ conclusions are longer than SAQs, like I have pointed out in previous videos. Of course your writing style can be different, but generally in ERQs we have a longer conclusion because there's so much to summarize. So in a contrast answer, what do we summarize? We summarize again the arguments made, such as biological approach looks at physiological underpinnings, but it is reductionist. So these are the points we have made throughout the essay. So we are showing, and then again contrasting even in the conclusion, that as compared to this socio-cultural approach looks at socio-cultural factors rather than physiological ones. It is slightly more holistic. In terms of methodological ethical issues, both have their own strengths and weaknesses. And then what we should do after summarizing whatever we have written, that's what we have done initially in the conclusion. We need to reconcile the arguments made. Okay, so now we've understood there's a contrast, there is too much difference between the approaches with respect to every argument that can be made. So what? So we need to integrate the approaches. That is a good finishing to the answer. We get to see the importance. Like this, when we contrast the two, we realize that both have strengths and weaknesses which can be compensated for. Whatever are the weaknesses of biological can be compensated by the strengths of socio-cultural and vice versa. So what we are learning from this is we need to integrate the two approaches for what? Why should we integrate them? Because we know ultimate purpose. When we learn abnormality, whether we are learning diagnosis or etiology, ultimate purpose is treatment. So once we integrate the approaches, we'll be able to develop multifaceted treatments which will have both biological and socio-cultural elements in them. Biological is like internal factors, internal elements, because it is physiology, and socio-cultural is external, outside the person, because it has to do with situations that the person is undergoing. So we'll be able to develop treatments which target both internal and external factors, and so they are more likely to be successful in bringing about effective results. So that is how we can conclude, by reconciling at the point of integration of both, by showing that there is a lot of contrast between them, but this contrast also makes them complementary and very useful for further treatment, which is the ultimate goal of abnormality, studying abnormality. Okay, so in this I have explained to you how different criteria should be met and how a contrast answer should be presented. It's a supplementary lesson. Actually, you need to read the answer to get like a model answer or an exemplar of how you should write, and my commentary should help you to see explicitly how exactly the answer was structured. So again, I would recommend strongly that you read the answer as well. Previously, when I had put a video on the discuss command term, I had got requests that students want me to go through the answer also, the exemplar, like point by point I should explain the exemplar. Right now what I did, I gave you general strategies for writing the answer, but students want me to like kind of go through point by point through the whole essay and specifically explain this particular essay which is given on the screen. So if you want me to do that with this video as well, you can let me know in the comments below. Please do not personally message me. If you leave a comment below, I will definitely reply to it. If you personally message me for something I've discussed in the video, I will not be able to reply. My personal number is for if you want to schedule classes with me for IB. So please use that number only for that purpose. If you have any feedback, any questions about this video, as I've mentioned, you can leave them in the comments box below. Next video will depend on the feedback that I get from you. Today, this is what I have to offer. Thank you for watching.